friends, welcome back to a brand new YouTube video. Today is a not great video. This is not a video that I ever wanted to make, or at least I hoped not to make it for a very long time, but unfortunately I have some bad news. If you follow me on Instagram at all, this is the only place that I actually posted this news. My Chinese cave gecko Gimli unfortunately passed away last Monday. This is something that honestly is so maddening to me and it's an incredibly sad story for him, and I wanted to share that on here in kind of a long form video because his story was just so different to any other reptile that I've ever had. I've never had a reptile that had this many issues or struggled this much in such a short period of time. So this is definitely something I wanted to share, and with my experience, I wholeheartedly hope that some of you guys can avoid the same mistakes that I made just because I was excited to get a new reptile. So this video had actually already been in the works because I wanted to talk about the red flags that breeders can display at like a reptile expo or even online that you should 100% avoid. Even before losing Gimli, I knew what was happening, what had happened, and what I did wrong, basically just kind of blowing over these signs that I had witnessed at the expo. And I really wanted you guys to avoid that. So in October of 2023, I went to NARBC Tinley, and this is a massive expo, absolutely massive. And I was really excited. I wasn't necessarily planning on bringing a reptile home that day. I didn't have all of the things that I necessarily needed, which isn't uncommon in the reptile community. Sometimes you find a species that you're just so in love with, and then you go and buy the supplies that you need that day, basically. So that's what I did. I bought my Chinese cave gecko at this expo, and I was not paying attention to any of the signs that the breeder had displayed, basically saying in big red flashing letters, "Do not buy anything from me." This breeder, obviously right from the get-go, should have been one that I avoided, but honestly I don't have too much experience buying reptiles from expos. I've only bought one of my reptiles from an expo. Others have been, like, unfortunately from a pet store when I very early started out, or from a breeder online. So expos are not one that I'm super well versed in, and obviously this was a learning experience for me. But there should have been things that I asked this breeder. There should have been signs that I observed. There should have been less excitement and more focusing on, you know, the quality of the animal that I was getting. And there was not that. So the first red flag that I just remember seeing off the top of my head was absolutely the fact that he was selling so many species. It wasn't necessarily like a certain type of reptile. Like, they weren't all geckos, they weren't all bearded dragons, they weren't all snakes. They were all there were several different species. You can't focus on breeding one species or one that you're particularly interested in when you have a myriad of species. The breeders that I really enjoy are the ones that focus on one species, and you can tell how passionate they are about the species that they breed. So look for a breeder that has a couple species, not 10. The second thing, always ask questions to your breeder about the reptile that you are considering buying. How old is this reptile? What are you currently feeding it? What is it currently housed in? If they have the specific hatch date, what is that hatch date? I think that people don't think about how excited you are. You're about to bring home a brand new family member, you know, you're excited, and sometimes you disregard these important questions because you're so excited, and that's what happened to me. Just to be real. I didn't notice until I got home, but Gimli had already had some kind of injury on his tail. There was a little injury to his tail. His tail was minorly bleeding, and I didn't notice that until I brought him home. I should have inspected him a little more. I should have, looked at the signs. That was a sign I should have seen. So I just want you guys to keep in mind, if you go to an expo and you want a reptile, or even if you don't plan on bringing one home and you do, find one there that you really want to purchase, please just make sure to ask questions. Otherwise, you might end up with a situation like me. And if you're asking these questions at the expo and they don't know the answer, leave. Just leave. There should be simply no reason that they don't know that information. So always ask questions, and if they don't know the answers, then you should not be buying. When I look back at the pictures that I took when I brought him home for the first time and the YouTube video that I made with those like little clips, his eyes were already like kind of starting to sink. Like, that's not a good sign. The biggest thing for me that this breeder did that I cannot get past is, one, I either didn't ask for the hatch date or he told me the wrong date, because Gimli was 8 days old. 8. Nobody should be selling reptiles at 8 days old. There's reasons for this. I'm not a breeder, but this is something that I'm aware of. You cannot ensure the stability of an animal at 8 days old. You just can't. Reptiles should not be sold to a new owner if the reptile is not eating independently and frequently, and there is no way for you to know that in a week's time. They also should not be sold if they have not had their first shed, and this does not happen in a week's time frame. At least not that I know of. And a lot of breeders do not sell their reptiles under a certain weight. And I can tell you right now, this gecko was not of that weight. Again, you cannot ensure the stability of your reptile at a week old. There is absolutely no reason that this breeder should have been selling Gimli at the age that he was. And I don't think I realized until I brought him home and I was like, oh my gosh, like, he's 8 days old. This just, to me, it screams a breeder that is only in it for the money and truly doesn't care how the reptile ends up. So these are things that I experienced with my gecko that I think could be very easily avoided. If you have to, take a notepad with you or write down in your phone's notes what things that you need to ask breeders while you're there, then totally do that. There is nothing wrong with whipping out a piece of paper and asking these questions to the breeder, and a good breeder shouldn't be bothered by these questions because they know that these questions are important to ensure that the animal is going to thrive. And an owner that cares about these questions is somebody that they likely want to send the reptile home with. I've had good experiences and I've had bad experiences, but this is definitely the worst. And I for sure learned from this. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to tell you guys about the breeder that I experienced. And I think that there's a lot of breeders like this, unfortunately. So I just want you guys to know how to steer clear. And if there are any other like written resources of other questions that you should ask, I will tag it in the description. And because of all of this, it was only like a very short month later that I ended up having to take him to the vet. He was lethargic, he wasn't eating at all, he had very obvious sunken eyes at this point, and that was, you know how reptiles do. They hide their symptoms really, really easily, and then you look at them the next day and boom, sunken eyes. I took him to the vet and I didn't come there with high hopes just because of how small he was, how young he was, just how he was looking. I did not come there with high hopes, and the vet basically told me that I was right to think that, and he pretty much only had a 50-50 chance of survival. They called him a failure to thrive situation, which happens a lot in cases like this, where the reptile was not fully established before moving to their new home, and here you have this baby reptile who never really got the start that it needed and now cannot thrive. These are cases that usually end up with a reptile that doesn't survive. So all of the symptoms that I was observing of Gimli were not good ones, and if you're a seasoned reptile keeper, you know obviously these are signs that you need to take your reptile to the vet and something's not good and you're gonna have to spend a pretty penny to save your reptile. I ended up actually leaving Gimli at the vet in order to be cared for the vet staff overnight, resulting in a pretty hefty fee of $700. I wish reptile insurance was a thing. So for your animals, obviously anything is worth their safety, their health, and obviously their life. So $700 later, I left him at the emergency overnight vet care. So again, I was told the 50-50 chance of survival. He was gonna have that with them or with me. That I could do my best at home or they could do their best there for $700 more, basically, a day. So I chose to bring him home with me because 50-50 chance regardless. I felt it was best for just the whole entire situation for me to bring him home and try my best. So I did what they recommended. He got his, force feedings and shots and all of that good stuff. And he ended up doing pretty well after that. He kind of started to get his activity back. He definitely looked a lot better and it seemed like it was going well. He was in a quarantine enclosure for a long time. And if you don't know what a quarantine enclosure is, it's basically just a super, super simple enclosure. It doesn't even have to be an enclosure. It's usually a tub of some kind because plastic is really easy to clean. It's usually going to be something like paper towel as the substrate with very limited hides, just so that you can ensure that they are pooping, that they are eating, their bugs aren't escaping anywhere, and you can control the humidity very, very well. So he was in that type of enclosure for a long time. I probably would say a couple months. And then I started to kind of phase him into a smaller enclosure. I'll go ahead and tag the video up here somewhere where you can watch my trip to the reptile store where I ended up purchasing that enclosure for him. It was a smaller enclosure than is recommended, of course, because he didn't do well in the big enclosure at all. And obviously the husbandry of your animal and their livelihood and making sure that they're thriving is so much more important than putting them in a gigantic enclosure just because it's recommended for healthy reptiles. You really have to take into consideration your reptile's health when following care standards. I actually got a hate comment the other day, literally probably 5 days after he died, saying that I was basically a piece of garbage for giving him such a small enclosure. And obviously this person had no idea what he was going through. At least I hope, because that's actually insane to leave a comment like that. Hate comments happen. They happen to me quite often, but this one kind of hurt a little bit considering that he just died and somebody was blaming me for basically having garbage care of my gecko. So anyway, he was in that quarantine enclosure for a long time. I moved him into that larger one and he was doing pretty well. I phased him into the loose substrate when I knew for a fact that he was eating, which he was. He was doing really great for honestly a really long time until he wasn't. And honestly, I don't have an explanation for that decline. Because of that failure to thrive situation, again, he just didn't get that start that he needed at the beginning of his life, so he barely lived longer than a year. And that's really disappointing because as reptile keepers, you can definitely put the blame on yourself no matter what you do. I did so much for him, but there's still that part of my brain that wants to continuously blame myself and think that his death was absolutely 100% my fault and I had to have done something wrong. And it's been difficult because his life was so short. I didn't get the chance to really give him the life that I wanted to give him. This was a species I was really, really excited to keep. Truly, I really was very interested in the Chinese cave gecko species. I was very excited to have him. I had amazing enclosure design ideas. I was gonna make it very, very alike to what they live in the wild. It was gonna be super exciting. I'm very, very disappointed in the life that he had. So I think that's all I had to say about this situation. I just really, really wanted to share this because I want people to avoid what happened to me and Gimli. I hope this gives you a little bit of insight on what to ask your breeder online or at an expo. Honestly, this whole thing has been really disappointing to me and I'm not sure that I will ever... I don't see myself buying a reptile at an expo again. I can share more about my feelings about expos at a later date, but this all has been extremely disappointing to me, and it irritates me. I'm a little angry about it. I just wanted to end this by saying I mean, I keep reptiles, I make mistakes, I'm learning and growing and continuously improving my care as time goes on, and transparency is something I very, very strongly value. I do not want to hide anything from you guys. That's kind of what this was for, just so that you guys knew what happened with Gimli. Basically, to sum it up, I really hope this video helped you make the right decisions in terms of bringing home a reptile. Thank you guys so much for all of your very, very, very sweet comments, very sweet DMs, just everything relating to Gimli. I thank you so, so much for all of those very, very nice words, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!